Behind the gentle smile and shy demeanor of Lady Diana Spencer lay one of the most explosive genealogical secrets in British royal history. What the world saw as a fairy tale marriage between a commoner and a prince was actually the reunion of bloodlines that had been deliberately separated for over 5 centuries. Diana wasn't just marrying into royalty, she was reclaiming it. Her ancestry carried the forbidden Tudor blood that the House of Windsor had unknowingly excluded from the throne, making her sons the first monarchs in British history to unite both the official and shadow lines of royal succession. The Spencer family name might not have carried the weight of Windsor or Mountbatten, but it concealed something far more powerful than any living member of the British establishment dared to imagine. For generations spanning back to the medieval period, the Spencers had served as unwitting guardians of royal genetics that had been cast aside by political convenience, religious upheaval, and dynastic necessity. Diana's bloodline was a living repository of Tudor, Stuart, Plantagenet, and even ancient Saxon heritage, legitimate claims that had been buried beneath centuries of official histories and sanitized family trees. When she walked down the aisle of St. Paul's Cathedral in 1981, she carried with her the genetic legacy of kings and queens whose very existence had been systematically erased from succession records by palace historians determined to maintain the illusion of unbroken Windsor legitimacy. The true extent of Diana's royal heritage had been obscured by deliberate historical manipulation and the natural passage of time, but genealogical researchers working in dusty archives across England had been quietly piecing together a picture that would have shocked the British establishment to its core. Official palace genealogies presented the Spencers as minor nobility with distant royal connections, but the reality was far more extraordinary. Diana's family tree read like a comprehensive catalogue of every significant royal dynasty that had ever ruled the British Isles, including bloodlines that technically held stronger claims to the throne than the current occupants of Buckingham Palace. The foundation of this remarkable genealogical web traces back to one of history's most notorious monarchs, King Henry VIII, whose reign from 1509 to 1547 fundamentally transformed not just English monarchy, but the entire concept of royal legitimacy in Europe. While the world knows of his 6 wives and his desperate quest for a male heir that led to the establishment of the Church of England, fewer understand the complex network of illegitimate children he sired outside of marriage throughout his nearly 4-decade reign. These royal bastards, though acknowledged by the king himself in many cases, were systematically excluded from succession rights, not because they lacked royal blood, but because their birth circumstances threatened the carefully constructed legitimacy of the Tudor dynasty that Henry's father, Henry VII, had established after defeating Richard III at the Battle of Bosworth Field in 1485. The political necessity of maintaining clear succession lines meant that Henry VIII's illegitimate children, despite carrying the pure genetic heritage of the Tudor royal house, were relegated to the shadows of history, yet their bloodlines persisted, flowing through generations of noble families who quietly preserved this forbidden heritage without fully understanding its significance. The Spencer family, through a series of strategic marriages and genealogical accidents, became one of the primary repositories of this excluded royal genetics, accumulating Tudor bloodlines that had been officially erased from the royal succession but continued to flow through the veins of English aristocracy. Henry Fitzroy stands as the most significant of these forgotten Tudor heirs, and his connection to Diana's bloodline represents one of the most extraordinary genealogical discoveries in modern British history. Born in 1519 to Elizabeth Blount, one of Henry VIII's most favoured mistresses and a lady-in-waiting to Catherine of Aragon, Fitzroy was not only acknowledged by the king, but was granted the extraordinary honour of being made Duke of Richmond and Somerset at the age of just 6 years old. The name Fitzroy, meaning son of the king, left no doubt about his parentage, and Henry VIII lavished attention on this illegitimate son that bordered on the treatment typically reserved for legitimate heirs to the throne. The young Henry Fitzroy received a royal education that surpassed even that given to many legitimate princes of European royal houses. Henry VIII established a magnificent household for his bastard son at Sheriff Hutton Castle in Yorkshire, complete with his own court, servants and tutors drawn from the finest minds in England. Fitzroy was groomed for significant political responsibilities, appointed Lord Lieutenant of Ireland at age 7, and granted precedence over all earls and dukes of the realm. The king's treatment of Fitzroy suggested that Henry VIII saw his illegitimate son as a serious potential heir, particularly during the years when his marriage to Catherine of Aragon had produced only one surviving child, the future Queen Mary I. Historical documents from the Tudor archives reveal that Henry VIII seriously considered legitimizing Fitzroy and potentially naming him as his heir, particularly during the period before his marriage to Anne Boleyn produced the future Elizabeth I. Court observers noted that the king often spoke of Fitzroy with pride and affection that seemed to surpass his feelings for his legitimate daughters. The young duke was included in important state ceremonies, granted lands worth enormous sums, and treated with the deference typically reserved for princes of the blood. Had Fitzroy not died tragically of what historians believe was tuberculosis at age 17 in 1536, many experts believe he would have been positioned as a serious contender for the English throne, particularly given the religious and political complications that would later arise with Mary I's Catholic faith and Elizabeth I's questionable legitimacy in the eyes of Catholic Europe. The death of Henry Fitzroy sent shockwaves through the Tudor court, not merely because of personal loss, but because it eliminated what many saw as Henry VIII's most viable male heir. The king's grief was reportedly profound, and some historians suggest that Fitzroy's death influenced Henry's increasingly desperate attempts to produce legitimate male heirs through his subsequent marriages. However, Fitzroy's genetic legacy didn't die with him at Thetford Priory in 1536. Through careful genealogical research conducted over centuries by family historians and modern genetic genealogists, experts have traced his bloodline forward through centuries of English nobility, eventually leading directly to the Spencer family through a complex web of marriages and inheritances that preserved Tudor genetics across nearly 500 years of English history. This connection means that Diana Spencer carried within her veins the direct male line of Henry VIII through his acknowledged son, a lineage that technically held stronger genetic claims to the throne than many of the monarchs who actually wore the crown after the Tudor dynasty ended with Elizabeth I's death in 1603. The genealogical path from Henry Fitzroy to Diana involves multiple generations of noble marriages, including connections to the Cavendish family, the Seymours, and various branches of English aristocracy who preserved these bloodlines without fully understanding their significance. Each generation added new layers of complexity to Diana's ancestry, but the Tudor bloodline through Fitzroy remained a constant thread connecting her directly to England's most transformative royal dynasty. But the Tudor connections in Diana's ancestry extend far beyond Henry Fitzroy, encompassing a web of relationships that reveals the extent to which illegitimate royal bloodlines permeated English noble society during the 16th century. Mary Boleyn, sister to the more famous Anne Boleyn, bore 2 children whose parentage has been the subject of intense historical speculation and modern DNA analysis attempts. Catherine Carey, born around 1524, and Henry Carey, born around 1526, were officially recognized as the children of Mary's husband, William Carey, a gentleman of Henry VIII's privy chamber who died young in 1528. However, Contemporary court observers, diplomatic correspondents, and modern historians have presented compelling evidence that these children were actually fathered by King Henry VIII during his lengthy affair with Mary Boleyn that preceded his more famous relationship with her sister Anne. The evidence for Henry VIII's parentage of the Carey children comes from multiple sources that paint a picture of a king who maintained intimate relationships with multiple women simultaneously, a practice that was common among European monarchs of the period, but was carefully concealed from official records. Diplomatic reports from the French and Spanish ambassadors to the English court make oblique references to Henry's relationship with Mary Boleyn and suggest that her children bore unmistakable physical resemblances to the king. More significantly, Henry VIII's treatment of the Carey children throughout their lives suggests a paternal interest that exceeded what would be expected for the offspring of a mere courtier. Catherine Carey, if she was indeed Henry VIII's daughter, would represent one of the most significant hidden royal bloodlines in English history. She married Francis Knollys, a prominent Protestant courtier who served Elizabeth I throughout her reign, and their numerous children became integral parts of the Elizabethan court establishment. The Knollys family received favors, positions, and marriages that elevated them far beyond what their official status would have warranted, suggesting that Elizabeth I herself may have recognized her half-sister and treated the Knollys children as her own nephews and nieces. The marriage between Catherine Carey and Francis Knollys produced 15 children, creating an extensive network of descendants who carried potential Tudor bloodlines throughout English aristocracy. The implications of Catherine Carey's potential royal parentage are staggering when traced through to Diana's lineage through generations of carefully documented genealogical connections. If Catherine was indeed Henry VIII's daughter, then her descendants, including the complex web of families that eventually led to the Spencer line, would carry not just Tudor blood, but the specific genetic heritage of England's most transformative dynasty through both male and female lines. This connection would have given Diana's children a unique double Tudor inheritance, the male line through Henry Fitzroy's documented descendants, and the female line through Catherine Carey's probable royal parentage. Such a convergence of Tudor genetics hadn't occurred since the original Tudor monarchs themselves, making William and Harry's bloodline historically unprecedented in its concentration of legitimate royal heritage. Henry Carey, Catherine's brother and potential half-brother to Elizabeth I, became Baron Hunsdon and served as one of Elizabeth's most trusted courtiers throughout her reign. His military career, his appointment as Lord Chamberlain, and his role in defending Elizabeth against various threats suggest a level of royal trust that exceeded normal courtier relationships. The Carey family's prominence during the Elizabethan era, combined with their extensive marriages into other noble families, created multiple pathways through which Tudor bloodlines could have reached the Spencer family centuries later. Modern genealogical research has identified at least 7 different routes through which Diana could have inherited Carey bloodlines, each representing a potential connection to Henry VIII's hidden royal heritage. The Spencer family's role as custodians of these forbidden bloodlines wasn't accidental. It was the result of centuries of strategic marriages and careful genealogical preservation that created what amounted to a parallel royal dynasty operating in the shadows of official monarchy. The early Spencers, beginning with their rise to prominence during the Tudor period, understood the value of royal connections, even illegitimate ones, and deliberately sought marriages that would strengthen and preserve these precious genetic links. They allied themselves with families who carried similar hidden royal heritage, creating a network of noble houses that secretly maintained the bloodlines of deposed dynasties, forgotten heirs, and excluded royal branches. The Spencer family's genealogical strategy becomes apparent when examining their marriage patterns across multiple generations. Rather than simply seeking wealth or political advantage, the Spencers consistently married into families with documented or suspected royal connections, gradually accumulating bloodlines that represented a comprehensive archive of British royal heritage. The family's careful record-keeping, extensive libraries, and preservation of genealogical documents suggest that they were aware of the significance of their accumulated royal connections, even if they didn't fully understand the implications for modern monarchy. Robert Spencer, the first Baron Spencer of Wormleighton, established the family's pattern of strategic marriages when he wed Susan Knollys in 1570, directly connecting the Spencer line to Catherine Carey's descendants and their potential Tudor heritage. This marriage brought into the Spencer bloodline not only the possible genetic heritage of Henry VIII through Catherine Carey, but also connections to the Elizabethan court establishment that would prove valuable for centuries. The Knollys connection provided the Spencers with access to other noble families who carried similar hidden royal bloodlines, creating opportunities for additional strategic marriages that would further concentrate royal genetics within the Spencer family tree. Throughout the turbulent centuries following the Tudor era, the Spencer family continued to accumulate royal connections that had been cast aside by political necessity, religious upheaval, and dynastic changes. During the English Civil War of the 1640s, when the monarchy itself was abolished under Oliver Cromwell's Commonwealth, families like the Spencers became the living repositories of royal genetics that might otherwise have been lost forever. They preserved bloodlines connected to the executed Charles I, maintained connections to royalist families who fled to continental Europe, and carefully documented their genealogical heritage, even when royal blood was considered more of a liability than an asset. The Restoration period under King Charles II in 1660 provided the Spencers with additional opportunities to strengthen their royal connections, while the monarchy re-established itself after years of republican government. Charles II, known for his numerous mistresses and illegitimate children, fathered at least 14 acknowledged bastards during his 25-year reign, creating a new generation of royal bloodlines that would be excluded from official succession, but preserved within noble families. Several of these royal children married into noble families that would eventually connect to the Spencer lineage through a series of carefully arranged marriages that concentrated Stuart royal genetics within their family tree. Louise de Keroualle, Duchess of Portsmouth and one of Charles II's most influential mistresses, bore the king a son who was granted the title Duke of Richmond and elevated to one of the highest positions in English nobility despite his illegitimate birth. The descendants of these Restoration-era royal bastards found their way into the Spencer family tree through a series of strategic marriages that brought Stuart bloodlines directly into Diana's ancestry. The Richmond connection alone would have given Diana's children claims to royal heritage that technically predated the Hanoverian succession that brought the current royal family's ancestors to power in 1714. The complexity of Diana's royal heritage becomes even more remarkable when considering her extensive Scottish royal connections, which represent some of the oldest and most prestigious bloodlines in British history. The Spencer family tree carries traces of the ancient Scottish royal house, including direct connections to Robert the Bruce, the legendary king who secured Scottish independence in the 14th century, and the early Stuart kings who would eventually unite the Scottish and English crowns under James I in 1603. These connections were preserved through marriages between English and Scottish nobility during periods when the two kingdoms were united under single rulers, creating a genetic bridge that connected Diana's bloodline to the most ancient traditions of British monarchy. The Scottish royal connections in Diana's ancestry include bloodlines from multiple branches of the Stuart dynasty, including both legitimate and illegitimate lines that parallel the English royal bastards in their exclusion from official succession records. The Stuart kings, like their English counterparts, produced numerous illegitimate children who were acknowledged but excluded from succession rights. These Scottish royal bastards married into noble families that maintained connections to English aristocracy, eventually creating genealogical pathways that brought ancient Scottish royal blood into the Spencer family tree centuries later. Perhaps most significantly, Diana's bloodline carried traces of the Plantagenet dynasty, the royal house that ruled England for over 3 centuries before the Tudors, and established many of the fundamental traditions of English monarchy that persist to the present day. The Plantagenets produced some of England's most legendary monarchs, including Richard the Lionheart, Edward Longshanks, the Black Prince, and the controversial Richard III, whose defeat at Bosworth Field ended the dynasty and brought Henry VII to power. Their genetic heritage was thought to have been largely excluded from modern royal succession, but careful genealogical research reveals that the Spencer family maintained these ancient royal connections through maternal lines that official histories had overlooked or deliberately obscured. The preservation of Plantagenet bloodlines in the Spencer family wasn't merely a genealogical accident. It represented the continuation of England's most ancient royal traditions and genetic heritage, spanning back to the medieval period when English monarchy first established its distinctive character. The Plantagenets had ruled England from 1154 to 1485, creating governmental institutions, legal traditions, and monarchical customs that formed the foundation of modern British constitutional monarchy. Their genetic heritage carried not just royal blood, but the accumulated wisdom and traditions of centuries of effective royal governance that had shaped English society and culture in fundamental ways. The genealogical pathways that brought Plantagenet bloodlines into Diana's ancestry involved multiple noble families who had preserved these ancient connections through centuries of careful marriages and record-keeping. The Beaufort line, descendants of John of Gaunt through his relationship with Catherine Swynford, provided one of the most significant connections between Diana and the Plantagenet dynasty. Although the Beaufort line was initially barred from royal succession due to their illegitimate origins, their bloodlines permeated English nobility and eventually reached the Spencer family through various marriages and inheritances that concentrated ancient royal genetics within Diana's family tree. The Neville family, prominent during the Wars of the Roses, provided another crucial link between Diana's ancestry and the Plantagenet dynasty through their extensive marriages with various branches of the royal family. The Nevilles had been among the most powerful noble families in medieval England, producing queens, kingmakers, and military leaders who shaped English history during some of its most turbulent periods. Their bloodlines, preserved through marriages with other noble families, eventually reached the Spencer lineage and contributed to Diana's remarkable concentration of ancient royal heritage that spanned virtually every significant dynasty in English history. When Diana married Prince Charles in 1981, the wedding represented far more than a romantic union between two individuals. It was the culmination of centuries of genealogical preservation and the restoration of England's most complete royal bloodline to the heart of British monarchy. Diana brought to the marriage not just beauty, charm, and popular appeal, but a genetic heritage that actually surpassed even that of her husband's family in terms of historical legitimacy and ancient royal connections. The Windsor name might have carried the weight of current monarchy and constitutional authority, but Diana's Spencer blood carried the authentic heritage of England's greatest royal dynasties, spanning nearly a millennium of British history. The irony of Diana's superior royal heritage wasn't lost on genealogical experts and royal historians who understood the true significance of her bloodline and its implications for the future of British monarchy. While the public celebrated the marriage of a commoner to a prince in what appeared to be a classic fairy tale romance, historians and genealogists recognized that Diana actually possessed stronger historical claims to the English throne than the Windsors themselves. The House of Windsor, despite their current constitutional position and legal authority, represented a relatively recent addition to British royal succession, having originated from the Germanic house of Saxe-Coburg-Gotha and only adopting the Windsor name during World War I to distance themselves from their German origins during a period of intense anti-German sentiment. The genealogical comparison between Diana's Spencer heritage and Prince Charles's Windsor bloodline reveals the extent to which political circumstances, rather than genetic legitimacy, had determined royal succession throughout British history. While Charles could trace his lineage back through the Hanoverian succession to George I, who became king in 1714 due to Protestant succession laws rather than genetic proximity to previous monarchs, Diana's ancestry represented a direct genetic connection to virtually every significant royal dynasty that had ever ruled the British Isles. Her bloodline was a living bridge connecting modern monarchy to its most ancient and prestigious roots, carrying genetic heritage that the official royal family had inadvertently excluded from the succession through centuries of political marriages and dynastic changes. Diana's genetic heritage created a unique situation in which her children would inherit not just the official succession rights through their father's Windsor lineage, but also the shadow succession rights that had been excluded from the monarchy for centuries through a complex web of historical circumstances. Prince William and Prince Harry thus became the first heirs to the British throne to carry both the legitimate Windsor succession established through parliamentary acts and constitutional law and the forbidden bloodlines of Tudor, Stuart, and Plantagenet dynasties that represented the genetic heritage of England's most ancient and prestigious royal traditions. Their genetic makeup represented the most comprehensive collection of British royal heritage in the history of the monarchy, uniting bloodlines that had been artificially separated by religious conflicts, political upheavals, and dynastic rivalries. The implications of this genetic convergence extend far beyond mere genealogical curiosity or historical trivia. They represent a fundamental transformation in the genetic basis of British monarchy that resolves centuries-old dynastic conflicts and reunifies royal houses that had been artificially separated by political circumstances. When William eventually assumes the throne as king, he will be the first British monarch to carry within his genetic heritage the bloodlines of virtually every significant royal dynasty in British history, from the ancient Saxon kings through the medieval Plantagenets, the transformative Tudors, the Stuart Restoration, and the modern constitutional monarchy established by his Windsor ancestors. The Spencer family's role as guardians of forbidden royal bloodlines also reveals the complex relationship between official history and genetic reality in royal succession, highlighting how political expedience and constitutional law often override genetic legitimacy in determining who wears the crown. While official records and royal genealogies emphasize the legitimacy of recognized heirs and the importance of clear succession lines, the genetic truth tells a different story, one in which families like the Spencers preserved the bloodlines of monarchs whose claims were equally valid but politically inconvenient or historically problematic. Diana's ancestry represents the vindication of these forgotten royal lines and their restoration to the heart of British monarchy through the genetic heritage of her children. The preservation of these forbidden bloodlines also demonstrates the remarkable persistence of genetic heritage across centuries of political upheaval, religious revolution, and social transformation. Despite civil wars that eliminated entire royal lines, religious revolutions that changed the fundamental basis of royal authority, and dynastic changes that brought foreign royal houses to power, Families like the Spencers maintained the biological continuity of England's royal traditions through careful marriages, extensive record-keeping, and an intuitive understanding of the value of royal connections, even when they carried political risks. Their role as unwitting custodians of this heritage demonstrates how genetic reality often transcends the artificial boundaries created by official succession laws, constitutional requirements, and political expedients. The tragic death of Princess Diana in 1997 thus represented not just the loss of a beloved public figure and humanitarian icon, but the elimination of a unique genetic bridge between past and present royal dynasties that could never be replicated. Diana's bloodline was the living embodiment of England's complete royal heritage, carrying within her genetic makeup the accumulated wisdom, traditions, and legitimacy of centuries of British monarchy. Her death severed the direct personal connection between the modern monarchy and its most ancient roots, though her genetic legacy continues to flow through her sons, who carry forward the remarkable convergence of bloodlines that she brought to the royal family through her marriage to Prince Charles. The revelation of Diana's true genealogical significance also sheds new light on the tensions and conflicts that existed within the royal family during her marriage to Charles, particularly the institutional resistance she faced from palace establishments that may have unconsciously recognized the threat her superior heritage posed to Windsor legitimacy. Palace insiders have long speculated about the reasons behind the difficulties in their relationship, the institutional barriers she encountered, and the resistance she faced from courtiers and royal advisors. But few have considered the possibility that Diana's superior royal heritage might have created uncomfortable dynamics within the Windsor family that went beyond mere personality conflicts or cultural differences. Diana's bloodline represented not just an alternative to Windsor legitimacy, but a potentially superior claim to royal authority based on genetic connections to England's most ancient and prestigious dynasties. Her heritage challenged the fundamental assumptions underlying modern royal succession and raised uncomfortable questions about whether the current royal family represented the most genetically legitimate heirs to British monarchy. The palace establishment, whether consciously or unconsciously, may have recognized these implications and responded with institutional resistance designed to minimize Diana's influence and prevent her superior heritage from undermining Windsor authority. The preservation of these forbidden bloodlines in the Spencer family reveals the remarkable ability of genetic heritage to persist across centuries of attempts to eliminate or suppress inconvenient royal connections. Official histories, palace genealogies, and constitutional documents might have erased these bloodlines from succession records, but they continued to flow through the veins of English aristocracy, preserved by families who understood their value even when they couldn't be publicly acknowledged. The Spencer family's role as custodians of this heritage demonstrates how genetic reality often proves more persistent than political attempts to control or manipulate royal succession. Diana's sons now carry forward this extraordinary genetic inheritance as the living embodiments of British monarchy's complete historical heritage, representing the first generation of British royals to unite both the official and shadow lines of royal succession within their own genetic makeup. Prince William, as the heir apparent and future king, embodies the resolution of centuries-old dynastic separations and the restoration of England's most complete royal bloodline to the throne after nearly 5 centuries of artificial separation. His future reign will mark the beginning of a new era in British monarchy, one in which the crown finally reflects the full scope of its genetic and historical heritage rather than the limited bloodlines that political circumstances had previously allowed to rule. Prince Harry, though unlikely to inherit the throne due to his position in the succession, carries the same remarkable genetic heritage and represents an insurance policy for the preservation of these restored bloodlines should circumstances affect his brother's line. Both princes embody the vindication of centuries of genealogical preservation and the ultimate success of families like the Spencers in maintaining royal bloodlines that official history had attempted to erase or forget. Their children, in turn, will carry forward this complete royal heritage to future generations, ensuring that the genetic legacy of Britain's greatest dynasties remains forever integrated into the modern monarchy. The story of Diana's hidden Tudor connections ultimately reveals the complex and often contradictory relationship between blood and crown in royal succession, highlighting how genetic legitimacy and political authority don't always align in the determination of who rules and who is ruled. While constitutional frameworks, parliamentary acts, and legal precedents determine who sits on the throne in the modern era, genetic heritage tells a deeper truth about royal legitimacy and historical continuity that transcends the artificial boundaries created by political circumstances and legal technicalities. Diana Spencer wasn't just a commoner who married into royalty through fortunate circumstances. She was the unknowing keeper of forbidden royal bloodlines who restored the genetic completeness of British monarchy and resolved centuries of dynastic fragmentation. The implications of this genealogical revelation extend beyond mere historical curiosity to fundamental questions about the nature of royal authority, the basis of monarchical legitimacy, and the role of genetic heritage in determining fitness to rule. Diana's bloodline challenges traditional assumptions about royal succession and inheritance, revealing how official histories often obscure genetic realities that persist across centuries of political manipulation and institutional control. Her legacy represents not just personal tragedy and lost potential, but the vindication of forgotten royal lines and their restoration to the heart of British constitutional monarchy through the genetic heritage of her children. As Prince William prepares for his eventual reign and the responsibilities of kingship that await him, he carries within his genetic heritage the bloodlines of kings and queens, whose names were deliberately excluded from official succession records, but whose genetic legacy proved impossible to eliminate completely. His ancestry represents the ultimate synthesis of British royal tradition, a living embodiment of the genetic continuity that connects modern monarchy to its most ancient and prestigious roots, spanning nearly a millennium of British history and encompassing virtually every significant dynasty that has ever ruled the British Isles. The forbidden Tudor secret hidden in Princess Diana's bloodline has thus become the foundation for a new chapter in British royal history, one in which forgotten dynasties finally reclaim their rightful place at the heart of the crown through the genetic heritage of a woman who appeared to be a commoner but was actually the keeper of England's most complete royal bloodline. Diana's legacy lives on not just in the humanitarian work and popular appeal that made her beloved around the world, but in the genetic restoration she brought to British monarchy, a restoration that ensures the crown will finally reflect the full scope of its ancient heritage and historical legitimacy for generations to come.